The weekly message of the United Church of Christ of Hummelstown, Pennsylvania, a podcast version of our worship service. To learn more and listen to the rest of the worship, check us out online at hummelstownucc.org.
I did an image search this week for ritual meal. And you know what I came up with? Communion and Passover. Certainly not a coincidence either. The rituals and terminologies of Passover are integral to the early theology about communion and how the rituals are understood by millions of people. So looking at the descriptions of the meal preserved here in Exodus, especially on a communion Sunday, is a wonderful chance to look deeply into the why and how of ritualized eating. The focus isn't entirely on how to fill the stomach, but on what each thing means. And smack dab in the middle of the story, telling of the plagues of Egypt, comes this pronouncement, this ritualized ways of remembrance, how to observe them this year and into the future. The piece we heard today comes, as I was talking with Tyla about, after the 9th plague, within the horrors of forced hard labor, and after Moses has confirmed to Pharaoh that the worst is yet to come. Death is on his doorstep. The back and forth of the Egyptian priests and the Israelite gods showing off their abilities is over. And then we break into this story arc, this dramatic journey that continues, and we start talking about ritual setup. It's an interesting placement for sure, because it is just odd in its location. But it asks us to look very clearly and deeply into this section, to see how critical each of these pieces are to the continued story of salvation to come. Each element built in has a purpose, a memory attached. Passover makes room for God's vision to become the vision of the people, and providing a means of acting on behalf of God for a scared and lonely people. Passover is about community, about providing for each other. Passover is also about pain, a pain that has never ended, and yet through which God is able to make a way for good to happen. In this interruption of a pretty major demonstration of God's power, we find something much more human at its heart. The part of the story that hit me hard was the multiple provisions for others, for all of the circumstances that the people would be in. The ritual makes room for those who could not afford their own fresh animal to still be protected, to participate with a less premium animal like a sheep or a goat. And maybe this seems like a throwaway or an assumption that should have been understood. But I see it as so much more than that. Furthermore, if a household was too small to consume an entire animal, it would join with its neighbor to participate together. It shows even more understanding of God, of the accommodations needed for the whole people of God. These show God participating actively, knowing that even if the Israelites are being oppressed as a group, there are still going to be levels of stratification within that, and that must be taken into account when preparing the whole community. It reminds me of a seminary friend's World Communion Sunday worship service, where he talked through how banana wine and raisin juice is used in places where grape juice or grape-made wine would be exorbitant to import, to use. Or even in this country, in places where it would be not possible to use a perfect set of glass or gold or silver trays, a wood bowl, a paper plate, function just the same to hold God's holy food. It makes room for the whole people of God to partake together. In so many places, God's people must find ways to build sacredness into our daily life. And God is making sure that we see that space ready for us, and that we understand it as a moment, as a statement of solidarity. So, too, there is something powerful about engaging in rituals with others. Individual acts of worship seem more earnest. Their effects are more remarkable when we know they are done with others. And the Passover setup specified this community action right from the beginning. At twilight, we will all slaughter our sheep, goat, lamb. It's a moment of connection, without a physical connection being required. Sure, some of them probably were close to each other in town, but not everyone would have been standing in the same holy place, and so every place must be holy. Every place must be appropriate for a connection to God. Remember those first days of the pandemic? We weren't on Zoom around here. It was just a Facebook stream from a cell phone. And yet, that first communion Sunday in pandemic land, we all took communion together. It wasn't prepared here. It wasn't the usual bread, tiny juice. It may have been a mug of coffee, a bite of tiramisu, or for others, Ritz cracker and a bit of water. It was still a joint communion. Communion is as decadent or as simple as we make it, so that we can find God's Spirit in the likely and the unlikely places of life. Passover was not meant to isolate the people of God, but to unite them in a common journey. And I believe communion is meant to do the same thing. It's meant to be a place where God can be shared, and each individual's self-worth is taken into account. All of God's people reveling in their unique relationship with divine. All of them, the adults, the couples, the families, the children, all of them, in any position in society, gathered, prepared, ready, sandals on their feet, staff in their hands, sandwich of just meat and some unleavened bread and some bitter herbs. How awesome it must have been when the Israelites gathered as a community to participate in that meal. The community gathered, apart from each other, but still gathered. The communal aspect of Passover acknowledges the fact that the individual is indeed part of a bigger group, because everybody belongs. But if everybody belongs, then we too have to acknowledge that we come to life with different experiences and concerns upon our hearts. For those ancient people, the main drama was their enslavement, their poor treatment, their living conditions, and all that was a daily battle for them. But even post-Exodus, there is no expectation that life is easy and perfect. And so in the ritual meal components, a space has to be made for sadness and remembrance of trauma. In the unleavened bread, the bitter herbs, the people internalize that past pain and know it as a part of their present, but it is not to overwhelm them. It is not an entire meal of bitterness, but a moment between phases to center on pain, a sensory reminder of bereavement and suffering, to be tasted, sure, to be chewed and swallowed and digested, yes, but still making a room for our pain to move through. There is freedom in the ritual of Passover to bodily take control of the impossible situation, and so by doing to gain the ability to effect change on what seems intolerable, immovable. There is freedom in the way it is set, the speed, the preparation. This was to be the night the world changed, when everyone must be ready to leave without being held back by their former lives. And so in the ritualization, there are ways that the story is told to make sure they are ready to hurry forward into the future. You can't leave any leftovers. You have to burn it all up. You can't allow the animal to be boiled. Can't be eaten raw, though, either. You have to be eating it standing up with your stuff ready to go. You got your pack. Let's go. A staff in hand, a hasty meal in the other. It becomes impossible to hold on to anything but the future. The ritual is a remembrance, but it also allows for memory to be made present, so that when the people of Israel will be ready to know it is really the time, it will be really the time. In the process of living, the people had to be ready to adapt, to be a people on the move if they were to escape the persecutions God was prepared to remove. When God makes a way for the people, God makes a way for all the people to become one people, one family. Rather than neighbors any longer, God invites them into meal sharing, ready to run relatives. And I think in that transition is the real gift of this meal. As much as in our meal of communion, God welcomes us throughout the ages to partake of meals that change our relationships with each other, that take our memories and build upon them, that lure us into a future day where God's realm of compassion and connection are not just ideas, but lived experiences. Rituals can build us and sustain us and pull us along in more ways than we could ever imagine. Our reading ends with this. This day shall be a remembrance for you. You shall celebrate it as a festival of the Lord. Throughout your generations you'll observe it as a perpetual ordinance. In the eating, in the preparation, in the godly interruptions of life, sacred space mixes with what we think of as mundane and suffuses everything with a new, old spirit. A spirit that can do great things with us if we let ourselves be led. Amen.
This has been the weekly worship from the United Church of Christ of Hummelstown. No matter who you are, or where you are, on life's journey, you are welcome here. Join us online or in person, at 104 East Main Street in Hummelstown, Sundays at 10:30 a.m. Thank you for listening today. We look forward to your fellowship.